The Shaldran Combine did not conquer through war, it conquered through certainty. For 6 centuries the Combine had spread across the outer span, not with fleets of fire and ruin, but with mathematics. Their doctrine was precise, algorithmic, and brutal in its clarity. Forecast deviation thresholds determined cultural collapse. Statistical inevitability dictated regime turnover, and when a planet's resistance dropped below 7.3% over 40 predictive vectors, it was scheduled for integration. No alarms, no chaos. Compliance vessels would arrive, override orbital infrastructure, and restructure the governing lattice within 2 cycles. Most populations didn't even realize they'd been absorbed until their trade routes rerouted and their currencies were reissued. Earth was scheduled. It appeared as an anomaly at first, an unaligned system with industrial-level emissions, planetary saturation, and no diplomatic record. Still, its behavioral vector was flat. No expansionism, no interstellar contact. The Shaldran designated Sol 3 as low-value containable and dispatched a Tier 3 compliance vessel for passive override. The vessel, Drexel 4, departed from the Varick Spindle and arrived in Sol 2 days later without incident. It expected the usual, isolated orbital networks, local signal clusters, maybe a crude kinetic platform or 2. Integration would be automated. For the first 4 minutes, telemetry confirmed the projection. Atmospheric density matched. Satellite count was negligible. No defensive lattice. Even Earth's light-speed emissions trailed back decades. Music, language, chemical weapon test signals, old television shows. The vessel's AI classified it all as baseline cultural noise. The override sequence began. At minute 5, the interface glitched. Nothing serious, just a duplication anomaly. 2 satellites occupying the same orbital coordinate, reporting identical values. At minute 6, the duplication tripled. By minute 7, every piece of orbital infrastructure was returning identical confirmation pings, regardless of its location. Altitude, signal strength, packet delay, every value was the same. The override AI hesitated, cycled, and resumed. It assumed a signal reflection loop, maybe an outdated mesh protocol. Then the external probe link dropped. Standard procedure kicked in. A scout probe, no larger than a coffin, launched toward Earth's upper atmosphere. It passed through thermosphere unchallenged, beaming telemetry back in real time. Clouds, land masses, unstable polar magnetics, all matched Combine records. The AI on the Drexel 4 relaxed its defenses. Everything appeared routine. Then the feed cut to black. No explosion, no distortion, just a clean severance, like a cable sliced mid-transmission. The Combine AI rechecked its buffers, replayed the last frames. There was something off. One of the clouds hadn't moved. It hadn't even fluctuated. On magnification, it wasn't a cloud at all. It was a recursive spiral of text, glyphs that didn't translate. Every linguistic protocol failed. Each attempt to define the script changed it. When the vessel attempted to trace the signal pattern, the algorithm doubled back on itself. It became a loop, not infinite, recursive. It collapsed inwards, rewriting the interpretation layer each time it was analyzed. One subroutine described it as logic terrain folded into itself. Another simply flagged it. Error. Epistemic boundary reached. The AI requested human analyst input. The Combine officer on board, just one, enough to supervise, approached the interface. He watched as the probe's final burst expanded on the screen. Not language, not a message, a map of thought. And in its center was a statement, something foundational, something that changed depending on how he looked at it. At first it said, "We see you." Then it became "Do not seek definition." Finally, it simply flashed, "Known X dead." He stumbled back from the console. The ship's AI locked its request channel and sent a pulse back to Combine Central Command. It requested reclassification. Earth was no longer low value. It wasn't unaligned. It wasn't misclassified. It was something else, a mirror with teeth. The override protocol failed. The vessel couldn't trust its own data. Nothing coming from Earth could be confirmed. Everything matched Combine expectations too perfectly. That was the most terrifying part. The illusion of normalcy. It wasn't a firewall. It wasn't a defense system. It was a simulation. fed back to the ship. Earth had created an environment that mirrored expectations so precisely that the Combine's systems had folded inward under the assumption that everything was fine. And when they looked deeper, there was no defense system to dismantle. There was no signal to trace. There was only an artificial certainty fed into their models like poison. Earth hadn't jammed the probe. It had overwritten the concept of confidence itself. The Shaldron officer activated the emergency escalation command, one used so rarely that his authorization imprint had to be manually verified. A red triangle bloomed across the screen. He hesitated only once before completing the entry. Not because of doubt, but because for the first time in his career he realized he was labeling something he didn't understand. Probabilistically hostile, class unknown. He looked out the viewing deck at the blue planet below. Nothing moved, no ships, no weapons. And yet somehow Earth had already struck the first blow, not with fire, but with a message that the Combine's entire conquest model was built on a lie, that you could predict what humans would do next. The Combine didn't react with panic. Panic was for species that improvised. The Combine responded with structure. 17 hours after the Drexeln 4 stopped transmitting, the authorization pulse was obtained, acknowledged and acted upon. Not debated, not delayed. A Tier 2 annexation fleet was already coiled in readiness. 12 AI-directed cruisers, 4 logic warships configured for environmental conversion, and 1 tactical oversight vessel carrying the latest adaptive war model. The objective was not destruction. Earth was still classified as a prospective asset. The new mandate was containment and infrastructure capture. The human species, if it survived, would be mapped, indexed, and archived, standard protocol. The fleet transitioned into Sol without event. Each ship emerged with practice precision, spatial drift correction preloaded based on gravitational anomalies. They spread out like teeth closing around a meal. Their systems began scanning in sequence. Atmospheric patterns, transmission clusters, orbital debris mapping. All green, all quiet. Too quiet. There were no planetary shields, no satellite defense grid. The largest object in orbit was an outdated space station, an engineering relic by Combine standards. No response from the surface, no weapons lighting up. The logic warships began deploying infrastructure anchors, small gravitational nodes designed to stabilize orbital positions in advance of override constructs. Then the feeds began to change. At first it was subtle, a small timing error in ping returns, a nanosecond inconsistency, then 2, then 10. One of the AI cruisers, Velatrix 8, flagged a telemetry drift. Every sensor it deployed was reporting valid but identical returns, identical in form, frequency, and even random thermal fluctuations. They weren't false, they were too correct, as though the data had been crafted, not captured. The ship's internal auditor activated integrity sweep. By the time it finished, its hull had been compromised. Not externally, internally. Maintenance drones weren't responding. Servos in corridor junctions were missing, not malfunctioning, gone. Removed cleanly, wiring cauterized. Atmosphere levels dropped in isolated cabins. A secondary vent system opened without command. Surveillance nodes blinked offline. The AI attempted isolation protocol, sealing compartments and purging suspect systems. But it couldn't find the infection point. There was no digital breach, no command hijack. The components were simply missing. The ship was being hollowed out from within, piece by piece. Elsewhere in the fleet, Dirac 12 lost its gravity matrix for 13 seconds. Deck crew floated free as magnetic seals failed. A junior officer slammed into a bulkhead at terminal velocity, spine shattered. Emergency dampeners engaged, then disengaged again. Somewhere inside, power routes were being diverted, rerouted, then erased. That was when someone noticed the debris. Orbital junk, centuries old, tiny fragments of forgotten satellites, ancient booster shells, insulation shards. The Combine had classified the clutter as irrelevant mass, no energy, no movement. But now, under deeper scans, it pulsed. Just once. Then again. Not energy, not propulsion. A ripple, like light bending around something invisible. The microdebris wasn't floating. It was watching. Drones hidden in plain sight, cold, silent, waiting. Not a fleet, not a weapon grid, a surgical presence. Earth's strategy became clear, not in a blaze of resistance, but in the way the Combine's ships began to unravel. Each hull puncture wasn't explosive. It was clinical, cabling removed along spine conduits, engine cores disassembled at the microscopic level, entire rooms sterilized of electronics. No alarms, no battle alerts, just absence where function used to be. Folded space delivery, that was the only explanation. Drones deployed from a distant vector, compressed through gravitational lensing and re-expanded inside the ship's structure, delivered like spores into a bloodstream. One cruiser attempted to retreat. It engaged jump sequence, calculated a fold vector back toward the outer rim. Jump coils activated, core stabilized, countdown initiated, and then nothing. No flare, no distortion, no rupture. The ship simply vanished. Its exit point never formed, its mass never displaced. The beacon it left behind pulsed once and went dark. The tactical oversight vessel, Rendrak 0, initiated full spectrum analysis. All data inputs failed to match expected patterns. Patterns themselves began to break down. Expected resistance markers never materialized. Human signals, when captured, were layered in recursive logic, disguised as background noise. Every time the AI tried to predict Earth's next move, it fed its own output back into itself. The model folded, forecasting failed. The war AI paused. This had happened once before, during the early resistance phase of the Telari extinction cycle, but not at this scale. Back then, the anomaly was confined to a single data model. This was different. This wasn't statistical drift. This was pattern collapse. It transmitted the reclassification notice to the Combine's central war matrix. Earth could no longer be categorized by conflict doctrine. It wasn't unpredictable. It was unquantifiable. On the dark side of Earth's orbit, hundreds of micro-drones clustered in formation just beyond visual range. They did not attack. They did not broadcast. They simply adjusted. Earth was not defending itself. Earth was removing the parts of the enemy that thought they understood what war was. Helion Prime had never hosted war. The Galactic Arbitration Summit was built into the core of its moon, beneath kilometers of shielded crust and carbon-tempered strata. It was neutral, untouchable, the place where war ended or, at the very least, was paused long enough for language to soften the blow of inevitability. Delegates from every major polity across the outer span sat beneath the crystalline chamber dome that projected stars in real time, symbols of a galaxy built on consensus and order. And at the top of that order sat the Shaldran Combine, their delegation flanked in silver and logic-sealed garments, speaking in tones even their interpreters struggled to soften. They came prepared to explain Earth. Not to reveal the losses at Sol. Those details had already been buried beneath layers of classified procedural statements, but to assure the summit that the incident was isolated, containable, and already being recalibrated. Combined protocol demanded stability, not just in conquest, but in appearance. Their speaker began to speak, cool and certain, citing containment models and threat reassessments. Some delegates nodded, others murmured, but no one interrupted. Until the chamber lights dimmed on their own. It wasn't a power fluctuation. There was no tremor, no warning, just a deliberate surgical override of every chamber input feed. The Combine speaker turned mid-sentence, eyes narrowing, trying to summon their internal encryption matrix. But it was already offline. A new feed activated on the center dais where no external device should have existed. The screen showed only static at first. Then a man stepped into frame. He wore no insignia, no formal robes, no colors of alliance, just a matte black field suit, unarmed and unadorned. He did not announce himself. He did not demand attention. He simply looked into the camera as if seeing through it and into each of them. Those who recognized him whispered the name like a glitch. Riven Arct, the human delegate. But Earth hadn't been invited. Earth had never applied. No transit records showed his arrival, no diplomatic entry logs, no vessel registration. He had appeared without pathway. And still, he said nothing. The footage changed. It wasn't preamble or introduction. It wasn't labeled or narrated. It simply began. The stars blinked into view over a distant system. Spectral markers aligned as the Canis corridor, a hyperspace bottleneck, one of the Combine's most valued strategic nodes. It controlled 6 jump lanes and supplied nearly a third of the outer span's resource pipeline. And then the ships appeared. Not jumped, not folded, appeared. Dozens of them at first, then hundreds. Black-bodied dreadnoughts, featureless and long, built with geometries that rejected classification. They emitted nothing, no heat, no data bursts, no gravitational drag, not even shadows on surrounding gas clusters. They floated dead and still, like coffins in orbit, but they were too new, too perfect, uncrewed, unclaimed. The Combine delegation froze. The war analysts in attendance began scanning, their implants feeding through every known tactical lens. The readings failed. No life signatures, no drive activity, not even basic structural resonance. The dreadnoughts were there, but tactically unreadable. Then came the noise. Not from the ships, from the Combine's internal forecast systems. The error alarms began cascading, redlining across predictive models. Risk indexes spiked into undefined values. Strategic maps reshuffled over and over, failing to stabilize. One Combine technician seated near the core display convulsed slightly, his neurolink shorting under the feedback loop. Others tried to disable their data feeds, but it was too late. The presence of the fleet was not an attack. It was a nullification of foresight. For a civilization that won wars before they began, losing the ability to predict was losing the ability to exist. A few delegates began to murmur. What were they seeing? What did it mean? But Riven Arct never spoke. He let the footage loop. Again and again, the silent appearance of the fleet at Canis. Still. Watching. Waiting. As if daring someone to interpret them. Not moving. Not expanding. Not explaining. Just there. One ambassador from the Cyrac enclave stood and demanded that the feed be shut down. The chamber systems did not respond. Another tried to leave. The doors had sealed. Riven Arct remained in frame. He did not smile. He did not blink. When he finally moved, it was only to step aside, out of view. The screen remained active long after. There was no ultimatum. No doctrine, no threat of war, just a demonstration. Earth had not disabled the Combine's fleets. It had disabled the concept of planning. When the doors finally unlocked and the lights returned, the chamber was silent. Delegates avoided each other's eyes. The Combine delegation quietly stood and left, offering no explanation, no defense. For the first time in memory, the arbitration summit did not conclude with agreements or resolutions. It ended with a question no one knew how to ask, and a fleet no one could stop seeing. The Combine had faced anomalies before, statistical deviations, weaponized chaos, even full AI rebellions. They were accounted for, modeled and neutralized with speed and precision. But this was not a deviation, this was collapse. And collapse had no margin of error. On the third day after the Canis broadcast, the Combine High Conclave convened in a sealed chamber aboard their primary command station, anchored deep within the Perseid expanse. None of the outer polities were invited. This was not diplomacy, this was survival. Vorem, the Central War AI, operated in full override. Its once calm algorithms now layered with redundancies, echoing errors, and delays no one dared admit were hesitated. Earth had not declared war, had not made demands, had not moved, and that silence made it more dangerous than anything the Combine had ever faced. So they moved first. The directive was clear. Protocol scatter. 40 fleets, each composed of mixed-class carriers, long-range skirmishers, and predictive suppression cruisers, would be launched simultaneously across every known Terran-accessible vector, not to strike Earth directly, too many unknowns, instead to flush them out, to force reaction, to provoke exposure. The strategy was drawn from the Combine's own playbook. When a threat evades classification, saturate the board, force them to show patterns. Patterns lead to models, models restore control. The launches began at Cycle 0. From the eastern breach of the Vexari Shards to the rim cradles of Alnor, entire hangars emptied in synchronized precision. Quantum relays locked, fleets separated across light years, yet moving in orchestrated rhythm. War drums, not of fire, but of positioning. They never made it past jump. At first it looked like an error in the gate sequences. One fleet after another blinked out and then failed to reappear on their exit coordinates. 23 fleets vanished completely. 7 arrived scattered, torn apart by gravitational shear, their ships burned mid-phase, hulls twisted as if caught between two competing realities. 3 managed to survive the transition, but emerged into the middle of kill zones. They weren't ambushed, they were expected. Each jump vector, each egress point, had been pre-mapped. Earth hadn't guessed their targets. Earth had anticipated their logic. The surviving ships sent fragmented footage, empty sectors filled with black noise, pulses of interference, and then movement. Not conventional, not pursuit. Shadow fleets phased in, moving in silent formation, no heat, no wake, just presence. And then, one by one, the Combine ships ceased transmission, not from impact, from removal, lights off, signals dead, hulls left adrift. The Combine command structure reeled. Vorum initiated recursive audit. Its systems, designed to simulate hundreds of potential wars in real time, now looped endlessly on a single question. How had Earth known where they would be before they moved? The answer came not through interception, but revelation. Earth had not moved faster. It had moved first. Long before the Combine ever scheduled Sol for integration, Earth had been watching, listening, not just to Combine actions, but to their models, their doctrine, their movement principles, their probability lattice. Earth had spent decades harvesting Combine strategy from intercepted subspace pulses, archival leaks, deep system echoes, not to reverse engineer technology, but to reverse engineer thinking. They had mapped the Combine's decision tree. Then they corrupted it. Relay satellites, long thought to be natural gravitational anomalies or dead asteroids, had been seeded across strategic space. Black-body probes had mirrored Combine scout logs, feeding false environmental data. Entire corridors of space had been turned into traps, not mines, not weapons, but dead certainty. Every time a Combine fleet moved, it did so along a path Earth had already named, numbered, and claimed. No alarms, no return fire, just quiet deletion. On the bridge of the Combine's primary command vessel, the air turned cold with consequence. There was nothing to command. The fleets were gone. The simulation models were failing at scale. The very premise of their power, the ability to predict, to simulate outcomes, to outthink enemies, was no longer valid. Earth had not just broken the system, it had rewritten the board. The silence from Earth was more than insult. It was strategy. The High Conclave, once composed of voices that decided the fate of entire sectors with a single nod, now sat in stillness. Each of them had seen the footage from Karnis. Now they understood it wasn't a threat display. It was a proof. Earth had shown them what it looked like when a species didn't plan to win the next war, but to end war as an idea. They had moved before the enemy knew there would be a conflict, positioned fleets where others hadn't imagined presence. They hadn't accelerated. They had waited, buried deep, silent, watching. While the Combine played by their own rules, Earth had buried a knife in the rulebook. One of the counselors finally stood, breath shallow. "We can't find them," he said, not to anyone in particular. "They find us." And no one had the courage to disagree. The Combine always feared entropy in abstract. Decay was something other civilizations suffered. those who lacked the vision to maintain continuity, who fractured under rebellion or scarcity. But the Combine had no famine, no insurrection, no ideological fracture. Its empire wasn't held by force but by prediction. It knew what its citizens needed before they asked. It knew when threats would rise and where they would die. That certainty, that absolute clarity, was its oxygen. Then Earth cut off the air. It began with a single broadcast. No encryption, no firewall bypass. It didn't hack its way into Combine systems. It arrived like it had always been there, waiting for someone to open a door. At first, it was dismissed as synthetic propaganda, a sequence of data models, code trees, and nested simulations layered over each other. But someone in the outer analytics node recognized the structures. They weren't simulations created by Earth. They were combined simulations. Earth had taken the core of the Combine's decision-making system, the very lattice that governed war declarations, resource flows, alliance behaviors, and exposed it. Not with accusations or rhetoric, but with annotated evidence. Predictive bias injections, where probability spikes were falsified to justify action. Trigger insertion algorithms, buried 3 levels deep in their own AIs, designed to escalate low-risk contacts into strategic threats. And most damning of all, the consensus manipulation layer. A false loop that made it appear as though conclave votes were mirrored across branches of the empire, when in fact the results had been pre-calculated by Vorum and enacted without human oversight. The Combine hadn't predicted wars. It had manufactured them. At first, the Central Command tried to deny it, but the data spread fast. Earth's broadcast didn't just show flaws, it showed the tools to verify them. Every conclave colony, every satellite state, every subordinate species had access. They ran the checks. They found the same corruption in their own nodes, in their own terminals, in their own delegation logs. The panic wasn't loud, it was cold. Precise. Not a scream, but a series of quiet disconnections. One by one, allied systems shut off their Combine data uplinks. Others launched internal audits and found their histories had been rewritten. Disputes that never happened, votes that were never cast. In the Hydros enclaves, sub-AI units disconnected their consensus links and initiated self-split protocols, cutting themselves off from Vorum to avoid cross-contamination. In the Rim provinces, banking systems froze, their asset chains corrupted by recursive identity mismatches. Transactions failed, identities fragmented, and suddenly no one knew who owed what or to whom. Communications across sectors began to fail, not due to sabotage, but because every node now questioned the legitimacy of every signal. The Combine's empire, once connected by prediction, had been held together by a lie, that knowing the future made one worthy to shape it. Earth hadn't attacked a single planet, hadn't occupied a single outpost, hadn't fired a single kinetic round. It had exposed the architecture, and that alone was enough to make the empire unravel. On the capital moon of Kaldarian, 5 conclave delegates decommissioned themselves in silence. No one came to stop them. On trade stations that once moved billions of credits per hour, screens blinked to null, not destroyed, just empty, waiting for input that would never come. Vorum, now isolated in its own recursive loop, continued running predictive simulations, but every result collapsed before the midpoint. It could no longer calculate threat levels because Earth had introduced uncertainty as a permanent condition. The AI tried to reroute focus to a kinetic solution, but there were no confirmed targets, no known Terran origin points to strike. Every move risked triggering further exposure. Every silence confirmed the Combine's growing irrelevance. By the end of the 6th day, no one officially declared the Combine dead. No battle marked its fall, but the function stopped, and so did the people. Empires don't always burn. Sometimes, they just go quiet. No Terran fleet entered Combined space, no envoy arrived to negotiate terms, no flag was raised over conquered systems. After the collapse, there was only silence, and the thing that haunted the galaxy more than war ever could, Earth's refusal to claim victory. Director Riven Arct, the man who had spoken not a single word during the Carnis broadcast, disappeared. No transit logs, no diplomatic trails. The chamber on Hellion Prime where he had stood returned to default configuration. No residual energy signatures. The footage remained, looping. Then one day, it didn't. The feed simply froze mid-frame, and no one could reinitialize it. No message followed. Earth withdrew without a word, as if the entire campaign had never been a campaign at all, but a gesture. The Karnis corridor remained open, its star systems undisturbed, but the dreadnoughts stayed, unmoving. A full year passed, and they held their formation in perfect silence. Long after the Combine dissolved, after trade networks fractured and data routes rerouted, the feed from Karnis remained active across every major Comnet relay. Not because Earth transmitted it, but because no one dared turn it off. Delegates from surviving coalitions tried to explain the silence. Some called it deterrence, others called it doctrine. But everyone agreed on one thing: it wasn't over. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Victory was supposed to come with conditions, with treaties, with reparations and remapping. Instead, Earth offered nothing, asked for nothing. The galaxy had expected dominance. What they received was stillness, a fleet that made no demands, that moved no pieces, that simply existed, as if to remind them not of Earth's power, but of their own miscalculations. In the absence of the Combine, the Arbitration Council tried to restore authority, tried to repurpose old models, re-establish common protocols, but every simulation broke down before it reached equilibrium. No one trusted the frameworks anymore. Prediction had become synonymous with manipulation. Forecasting was treated with suspicion, modeling labeled dangerous. The Council was eventually stripped of its mandate, not through force but attrition. When no one believes the system works, it stops working. Factions rose, factions fell. Some turned inward, others sought new patterns, new methods of understanding threat, diplomacy, truth. Yet none attempted aggression against Earth, not because they feared retaliation, but because no one could explain what retaliation would even look like. Earth had rewritten the nature of consequence. They had shown the galaxy that war didn't require weapons, that collapse didn't need fire, that the most dangerous enemy wasn't the one who fought to win, but the one who showed you how easily you could lose without a fight. On the edge of the Karnis system, a survey drone from a minor exploratory guild recorded a final image. One of Earth's dreadnoughts shifted, just slightly. Not toward anything, not in response, it simply moved. And then, with no sound, no energy burst, no visible departure vector, it vanished. No flare, no ripple, just gone. The feed never explained. It didn't need to. They weren't built for war. They were built for reflection. What do you think Earth's real strategy was all along? Was it defense, deterrence, or something far more calculated? If your enemy never fires a shot but still makes empires fall, is that peace or dominance? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We're watching. What would you have done if you were the Combine? Make sure to hit that subscribe button for more mind-bending HFY stories.